The heat of Lagos hit like a physical blow the moment the cabin door opened. Stepping out into the sprawling chaos of the airport, I scanned the restless sea of faces until I spotted him, a local driver holding up a jagged piece of cardboard with my name scrawled across it. His vehicle was a mechanical hazard, a vintage car that looked as though it had been dragged from a scrapyard solely through the sheer power of optimism. The back doors were secured shut with makeshift wooden braces, and the windows were jammed firmly in place. He said, "Lock your door. Look straight ahead. I don't care who taps on the window, and I don't care what they offer you. Whatever happens, do not get out of this car to buy sea salt." He guns the engine, cutting hard onto an elevated overpass. Below, the sprawling urban maze slowly gives way to the darkened, industrial fringe of the coast. A few miles south, the city's neon haze fades into the looming, skeletal silhouettes of gantry cranes and rusted shipping containers. The air turns heavy with the reek of damp diesel, brackish water, and marine oil. The taxi rolls past crumbling concrete perimeter walls, over cracked asphalt pitted with deep puddles, and down into the shadows of Preston dockyards. The water laps oily and black against the pilings, and out in the dark, off-duty cargo hulls creak softly against the piers. To a hotel that had clearly seen better decades. The air conditioning's dead, and the light fixtures hanging by their wires, I muttered, looking around the dim room. Needing relief from the stifling air, I tipped the room boy to brave the night and track down some cold beers. It was the only way to survive the night. The next morning, the driver returned, ferrying me back to the airport terminal where Mobil Oil operated its own lifeline, a twin-engine Twin Otter aircraft affectionately known as the Red Horse, which could carry 12 passengers. The flight was a 400-mile low-altitude journey straight across the emerald expanse of the Nigerian jungle, heading toward Iket on the Bonny River. Because the Red Horse was unpressurized, we hugged the canopy, flying low enough to watch the dense green wilderness roll beneath us like an endless, breathing ocean. Unknown to me at that exact moment, I would end up spending many flights inside this very same aircraft. And some of them were going to be absolutely horrendous. Once the rainy season kicked in, all smooth flying went straight out the window. The plane didn't just encounter weather, it got violently tossed through it. We would bounce around in the sky. The turbulence was sheer madness, dropping your stomach straight into your boots every few seconds. To top it off, the airframe seemed to lose its seal in the downpours. Water would start leaking in from everywhere, dripping off the ceiling, trickling around the window frames, and soaking into shoulders, laps, and luggage. The most absurd part was the psychological game inside the cabin. Everybody on board tried their absolute best to pretend they weren't a little frightened, but everyone knew the truth. We would look blankly ahead, and pretending that being thrown open down in a leaking, rattling metal box was just standard procedure. We touched down on shore, and I was directed to the terminal's diver's block, the staging ground for crew changes. I was scheduled to spend the night there and catch a helicopter offshore the following morning. That evening, the marine superintendent, the diver's absolute boss, headed up to the terminal to watch a movie. Down in the diver's block, I settled in with 3 Orpha rough and ready divers for a long, easygoing chat. I packed my pipe, a comforting habit from back home. One of the divers leaned in. "What on earth have you got in that pipe?" he asked, grinning. "Erinmore," I replied. "Try some of this local Nigerian tobacco instead. It'll give you a proper taste of the place." Trusting the locals, I mixed it in. Within minutes, the local herb hit. It wasn't tobacco, it was potent, unadulterated marijuana, and it sent my world spinning completely sideways. Back in those days in Iket, almost every family had their own little plot of land. But if you walked through the village allotments, you'd notice pretty quickly that most of the locals were growing the exact same thing, marijuana, right out in the open. Feeling the walls begin to blur, I mumbled, "Have you guys got a room sorted for me?" "Follow me," one of them chuckled, guiding me down a dark passageway and shoving open a door. "You stay here for the night." I collapsed onto the mattress and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost instantly. What I didn't know, and what my cheerful hosts neglected to mention, was that they had just tucked the brand new, thoroughly stoned stranger straight into the private bed of the Marine Superintendent. Late that night, the movie ended, and the big boss walked back into his quarters, expecting peace, quiet, and his own mattress. Instead, he found a stranger flat on his back, utterly comatose, smelling faintly of foreign smoke and deeply asleep. The explosion woke the whole block. The superintendent stormed out, his face purple with fury, demanding Ron, the supervisor, get me out of his sight immediately. Ron tried desperately to explain the prank the divers had pulled, but the boss was having none of it, until Ron dropped a critical detail: I was the welder they had been waiting for. I woke up that morning expecting a routine departure, getting my kit together, ready to head out and fly offshore on a 3-month contract I'd taken. But before I even stepped out the door, a message came through: I was needed down at the Marine Superintendent's office before I left. When I walked into his office, I knew we had a serious issue to cover. Outside, the sea was doing what it always does, relentlessly pounding against the jacket legs of the platforms. But the real headache wasn't out on the open water, it was right in the splash zone. That's the area on the pipeline risers where the waves rise and fall, right at the surface. It's a brutal environment. The constant air and seawater eat away at the metal, and on several of our platforms, those risers were leaking. It was a massive problem, but before I gave the superintendent a definitive answer, one he might not fully grasp until we had the real facts, I needed to get out there and see it with my own eyes. I spent the next few days flying around offshore from platform to platform. We had the other boys down there inspecting all these damaged, heavily corroded pipes so we could gather the full picture before making any big decisions. Truth is, I only had to look at one. The second I saw that corroded pipe in the splash zone, I already knew in my gut, I can fix this. Once I had my eyes on the problem, the solution was clear. I went back to the superintendent and laid it out: look, we can build custom dry habitats. We fit them right around the leaking pipes in the splash zone, seal them off, pump the water out, and work inside them dry. Once we're in the dry, we fit repair sleeves around the risers and weld them solid. He looked across the desk at me, weighing it up. Can that actually be done, Bob? I told him it could. To me, it didn't seem like a problem at all. If you spent your life as a practical man, you don't overcomplicate it. You see the work that needs doing and you get on with it. I learnt in the coal mines, if you can't move it, paint it. He gave me the go-ahead, so I went straight to work down in the diver's yard and actually built 2 complete habitat units. That's when BOC came back. I was working down in the diver's yard when these representatives came walking over. We stood there together, looking down at the 2 units I'd just constructed with my own hands. Now, looking at the craftsmanship, they couldn't argue. They stood there agreeing that the units were good, very good, in fact. But they had a massive problem with the fact that I was the one building them. They didn't want a field man solving the problem, they wanted control, and they wanted the payday that came with it. They wanted me out of the way. So they looked at me and said there was a job up in Canada if I needed it. They were trying to ship me off across the world just to clear the deck for themselves. I looked right back at them and said, I'm quite happy where I am here, thank you. In the end, They found out all their rules, regulations, and patents, telling us we weren't allowed to build or use them because they claimed the idea was theirs. It had nothing to do with whether our units worked, and it certainly wasn't about safety. It came down to pure money. They were set to make astronomical fees off the oil company. I was just a man on the job, about to make a good wage fixing a dangerous leak with plain common sense and hard work. But corporate greed stepped in, tried to ship me out of the picture, and turned a straightforward engineering fix into a battle over patents and profits. We were operating up the Bonny River, between Port Harcourt and Eket. For those who don't know, the mouth of that river is notoriously treacherous. The high volume of sediment flowing down the Niger Delta constantly shapes and shifts underwater sandbanks. It was a devastatingly common tragedy. The locals relied on the river for their entire livelihood, but that specific crossing point over the bar demanded a heavy toll from anyone who misjudged the tide, the weather, or the weight of their load. It's an unforgiving piece of water, and anyone who spent time out there on the rigs or navigating those channels knows just how quickly that river could turn fatal. What was a clear, deep path a few months ago could easily be a shallow sandbar today. At high tide, these banks hide just inches beneath the surface, completely invisible. We were on a diving support vessel, DSV. On a ship like that, you essentially have two bosses running the show, the captain, responsible for the ship and the crew, and the diving supervisor, my role, responsible for the dive team and the lives of the men underwater. Normally, you hope you're working with a captain who has spent plenty of time around divers and understands the stakes. On this particular day, we were heavily loaded with tons of fresh water, meaning we sat incredibly deep. Coming through that channel, if you aren't careful, you will hit the bottom with a massive bump. We were just about ready to head back offshore when an emergency call came over the radio. The second engineer's wife had been rushed to the hospital in England with severe pregnancy complications. The shipping company acted fast and already had a replacement relief engineer booked to fly in overnight. The logical, safe move? Leave the worried second engineer on the jetty, head out across the dangerous bar on the high tide, and anchor up in deep water. A helicopter could just fly the replacement engineer out to us in the morning. But the captain refused to leave a man short. He insisted on crossing the bar with the distraught engineer still on board. Once we safely anchored offshore, we got word that the replacement engineer had arrived at the terminal. But instead of waiting for daylight or a helicopter, the captain made a reckless call. He ordered us to drop our small inflatable boat, ride it back across that treacherous bar into the terminal, and collect the new man. The trip into the terminal was awful. The new engineer was absolutely terrified coming back across the bar with us, fighting the massive swell, but we made it. Now, look at the situation. We had two second engineers on the ship. The guy going home desperately needed to get to land. So, the captain ordered us to take the inflatable back across the bar a third time to drop him off. That run was even worse. The conditions were deteriorating rapidly. By the time my buddy and I turned the inflatable around to head back to the ship for the final time, darkness had completely fallen. That's when disaster struck. Without warning, the world flipped upside down. A sudden swell struck, and the inflatable boat capsized, violently slamming me and Dave into the water, which rushed over me instantly, spinning me into a disorienting haze of churning river foam. The murky depth swallowed me whole. I clawed my way to the top, gasped a burning lungful of air, and was immediately dragged under a second time. Water rushed into my throat. Heavy as lead, my soaked boots were anchoring me down, fighting against every instinct I had to rise. In a flash of desperate adrenaline, I kicked violently, wrenching the boots off my feet. They slipped away into the deep, and my body instantly felt lighter. I kicked upward with everything I had left, breaking through the surface, gasping, coughing, and desperately searching the water. And then, right next to me, was the red fuel tank. It had ripped free from the Zodiac and was bobbing on the swell. I lunged forward, reached out, and locked my fingers firmly around the handle. I held on for dear life as the warm currents pulled around me. It wasn't much, but that single handle was keeping my head above water and keeping me alive. The red petrol can, some raw fuel leaking from the filler cup directly into my eyes and face. The fumes were blinding and suffocating. My buddy was clinging to the other side of the upside-down hull. The powerful tide immediately began ripping us out to the open sea. The boat had heavy, thick rope fendering running around it. It made the boat way too heavy for the two of us to flip back over in the water, but thankfully, that same fendering kept us afloat. At one point, my buddy panicked and wanted to swim through the dark water to get to me. I yelled at him to stay exactly where he was, and I carefully worked my way over to him so we could stay together. As we drifted out into the black ocean, we could see the distant searchlights of helicopters passing us by. They couldn't see us. We were just two tiny specks in a massive, raging sea. To make matters worse, my buddy spent the entire night terrified that sharks were going to bite his legs off. I knew for a fact there were sharks in those waters, I'd seen them on my dives, but I kept my mouth shut about that. I just held on and prayed. We were lost at sea, clinging to that overturned hull, all night long. It wasn't until daylight broke the next morning that a rescue crew finally spotted us and pulled us out of the water. I later found out that back on the ship, the captain had actually broken down and cried during the night. He was convinced he had sent both of us to our deaths. We were incredibly, profoundly lucky to survive that night. Nature doesn't care about bad logistics or rushed decisions, and that night, the Bonny River bar almost kept us forever. Things never change working out here. You could be right in the middle of routine pipeline work when, out of nowhere, mobile calls up through the terminal operator. Immediately, you're asked to drop what you're doing and head out past the rigs to help a ship in trouble. We were working much further out than the standard oil rigs, right on the edge of the deep water. These weren't local fishermen paddling around in small canoes, these were massive, industrial factory ships and commercial shrimp trawlers, often huge Russian vessels that spent months at sea processing catch on the open ocean. It always started with a sudden break in the day. The operator in the terminal would get the message from mobile and pass it along to our crew. We've just been called up. There's a factory ship further out with her gear fouled up in the propeller. Drop what you're doing, we've been asked to go out and help them immediately. Off we used to go, throttling up and pushing out into the swells beyond the platform flares. Out on the high seas, there was a real camaraderie between working crews. If a ship was disabled, you went out to help them, no matter where they were from. When you pulled alongside one of those giant factory ships, you could only imagine the sheer chaos tangled beneath her stern. The sight around the propeller shaft was almost always a solid, dangerous nightmare. Miles of heavy steel cables, thick commercial netting, and bridle lines drawn tight and melted together around the spinning shaft until the wheel ceased completely. Monster gear, all kinds of heavy deep-sea riggings and ocean floor debris bound tight into the blades. We'd get straight to work, using heavy hydraulic cutters, winch lines, and sheer physical effort. We'd peel back layer after layer of jammed net and bite through those steel cables until the final strand snapped free and the propeller turned clear. Once we had them sorted out, no money ever changed hands. Out there, help was paid for in pure ocean solidarity. Before our gear was even stowed away, the crew on the factory vessel would be lowering heavy, waxed cardboard boxes over the side to our deck. These were commercial, pre-packed boxes flash frozen right on the factory floor. Inside were absolute monsters of the sea, prawns so huge and long that just 2 or 3 of them stretched end to end would fill a whole serving platter. In those early days, coming home and bringing a few those frozen prawns home was a proper event. You'd carry them into the house, set them down on the kitchen table, crack open the lid, and pull out those giant, armor-plated prawns. They were more than just a grand meal, they were a trophy from the deep water, from the days out past the rigs where hard work and helping out other mariners always paid off. Before we move into this next chapter, I want to give you a gentle warning. What I'm about to share is distressing, tragic, and not for the faint-hearted. If you are sensitive to hard truths and graphic accidents, please feel free to skip ahead. To be honest, my wife Brenda knows how deeply this event affected me, and how much it still haunts me all these years later. She'd probably prefer I left it out to spare myself the grief of reliving it. But I felt a deep responsibility to put it down. I owe it to the memory of Joseph, a bright young man whose life was cut far too short, and to the reality of the work we did. If you choose to listen on, please do so knowing this comes from a very painful place in my heart. The work on the line. We were working off the coast of Nigeria on the BLP operational platform. Every drop of oil from the terminal flowed through that platform. Deep inside her, positioned right underneath the accommodation block, was a massive surge tank about the size of a double-decker bus lying flat on its side. When crude oil pumped from the terminal through the 42-inch pipeline, it passed through that surge tank before heading down to the seabed and across to the single buoy mooring, SBM, where tankers tied up to load. The surge tank's job was critical. It absorbed line pressure spikes from the terminal so they wouldn't blow out the subsea hoses under the SBM. Operating from our dive support vessel, a floating factory, essentially, our team handled the jobs no one else could or would do. We called it marine maintenance. On top of this massive surge tank sat an old plywood hatch cover, held down by badly rusted screws. It needed to be replaced. Among our local Nigerian crew was a young man named Joseph. He was a great lad, good at his job, tending our umbilicals and keeping our diving gear in order. We called him our local chippy. I sent Joseph down through the deck grating to get started, but because the screws were completely rusted solid, he had to cut through them using a hacksaw. I explicitly told him, "Cut the bolts, but don't touch that cover until I get there." It was a flat-out busy morning, but after a while, Joseph came back up to find me. "I'm ready for you, Mr. Bob," he said. I replied, "Right, come on then. Let's go have a look." Joseph climbed back down through the grating first. All the rusted bolts had been sawed through. The moment he moved that plywood cover, the trapped gas ignited. It didn't just catch fire, it exploded like a roaring volcano, launching a torrent of fire straight up out of the tank. If Joseph had ducked to one side, he might have had a chance. Instead, he instinctively tried to scramble back up through the narrow hatch in the grating. When I reached down and pulled him up into my arms, the blast had taken everything. His clothes were gone, his heavy boots were frazzled, and he was burned from top to bottom. He held on to me, terrified, repeating over and over, "Don't let me die, Mr. Bob." Someone called for an emergency airlift. I carried Joseph up to the helipad in my arms, trying desperately to strap him into the seat while keeping him calm. The pilot was in complete shock at the sight of him. "Don't worry about the straps," the pilot said, visibly shaken. "Let's just go. Let's go." We flew him straight to the local hospital in Nigeria. Recognizing the severity of his injuries, the company arranged a British Air ambulance to fly him directly back to Mount Vernon Hospital's burns unit in London. Shortly after, I received an urgent call ordering me to fly back to London immediately. The hospital staff said Joseph was constantly calling out for me, Bob. Bob, and they believed seeing me was his only fighting chance. When I arrived at the hospital, one of the nurses stopped me before I could go in. She told me to take off my shoes and put on a full protective suit, It looked like a spacesuit, so I wouldn't risk bringing in any infection. She looked at me and asked, "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" I told her no. "Get yourself ready," she said softly. "It's not nice." She was right. It was completely horrible. They had Joseph suspended in a kind of special liquid tank, almost like a big fish tank, with bandages covering him everywhere. Seeing him like that was heart-wrenching, but I stayed there by his side. Despite everything the medical team did, Joseph passed away. The major inquiry that followed revealed the tragic truth of what actually happened. It was a case of spontaneous auto-ignition. Joseph hadn't made a mistake, nor had he struck a spark with a tool. The trapped crude vapors inside that unventilated tank were so volatile and unstable that they didn't even need a flame to catch. The exact second Joseph shifted the lid and fresh oxygen rushed into that void, the mixture ignited automatically. It was a ticking time bomb waiting for air. Afterward, Mobil arranged to have Joseph's body flown back to his home village in Nigeria, where he was laid to rest with a good, proper funeral. The company also made sure to support his family financially in a very significant way. It doesn't change the tragedy or bring Joseph back, but they did right by him and his family in the end. The emotional weight of what happened took a severe toll on me. I had to go through counseling afterward just to try and process the trauma of that morning and everything that followed. It affected me deeply then, and it still does. It is a day, a face, and a voice I will never, ever forget.